A racist police officer humiliates a black man, unaware of who the man's brother is. The community center buzzed with energy as Zandrel Kofi wrapped up the evening meeting. He glanced around the room, taking in the animated discussions and the sense of camaraderie that filled the air. A group of local residents sat together, passionately sharing their thoughts on police reform and the need for accountability within the department. Zandrel's heart swelled with pride at witnessing this engagement. People who had once felt powerless were now finding their voices. "Thank you all for your input tonight," Zandrel said, raising his voice slightly to cut through the chatter. "Your stories matter, and together we can create the change our community desperately needs." He emphasized the importance of their voices, knowing that this was the lifeblood of his work as a community organizer. As the meeting concluded, Zandrel noticed an older woman, Ms. Thompson, lingering near the door. He approached her, a warm smile on his face, eager to express his appreciation. "Ms. Thompson, do you need help with anything?" he asked, genuinely concerned. She shook her head, her expression a mixture of gratitude and worry. "No, dear. I just wanted to thank you for what you're doing. We need more people like you advocating for us," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Zandrel felt a swell of pride at her words. "I'm just doing what I can. We're in this together," he replied, giving her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. After a few more exchanges of gratitude, he stepped outside into the crisp evening air. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the streetlights flickered to life, casting pools of warm light on the pavement. Zandrel took a deep breath, inhaling the familiar scents of his neighborhood. Faint traces of fried food from nearby restaurants mingled with the earthy aroma of freshly watered flowers. He often found solace in these simple moments, a reminder of the community he loved. As he walked home, Zandrel reflected on the evening's discussions. The community's passion ignited a fire within him, but lingering doubts nagged at the edges of his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that, despite their efforts, the systemic issues they faced would not change easily. The police department's reputation in their neighborhood was tarnished, and the scars of past encounters with law enforcement were still fresh in many minds. Turning a corner, he spotted Officer Jax Albright leaning against his patrol car, arms crossed over his chest. Zandrel's heart sank. The officer was known for his abrasive demeanor and racial bias, a reputation that made many in the community wary of him. Zandrel had encountered Albright before, and he knew that any interaction could quickly escalate. As he approached, Zandrel's mind raced. He considered crossing the street to avoid confrontation, but he dismissed the thought. This was his neighborhood, and he had every right to walk through it. Besides, he wasn't going to let fear dictate his actions. "Evening," Officer Albright called out, his voice dripping with condescension as Zandrel drew closer. "What are you doing out here? You don't look like you belong in this neighborhood." The officer's tone was laced with disdain, as if Zandrel were a trespasser in his own community. Zandrel felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had just spent hours advocating for community rights, and now he found himself confronted by a man who embodied the very issues they were trying to address. "I live here, officer," Zandrel replied, trying to keep his tone steady. "I'm just walking home from a meeting." "Sure you are," Albright retorted, his eyes narrowing. He took a step closer, invading Zandrel's personal space. The flicker of a smirk danced across his lips, making Zandrel's skin crawl. "Let's see some identification, then." Zandrel's heart raced. He hesitated, weighing his options. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong, yet the power dynamics were glaringly obvious. Should he comply and risk further humiliation, or stand his ground and challenge the officer's authority? The memories of past encounters flooded his mind, friends who had been unjustly treated, the stories of harassment that echoed through the community. "Is this really necessary?" Zandrel asked, his voice firm but respectful. "I haven't broken any laws." "I'm not asking for your life story, just your ID," Albright snapped, his patience wearing thin. "Or are you hiding something?" The threat in his tone was unmistakable, and Zandrel felt a pit form in his stomach. The officer's presence felt suffocating, a reminder of the systemic issues that plagued their community. Zandrel's mind raced as he weighed his options. He could feel the eyes of passers-by glancing toward them, a few people slowing down to observe the interaction. The tension in the air was palpable. It felt as if time had slowed. He knew he had to make a choice quickly. "Why don't you call for backup?" Zandrel suggested, sarcasm lacing his words. Maybe they can help you with your insecurity. He felt a rush of adrenaline, a moment of bravery that propelled him forward. Albright's face flushed with anger, and his smirk vanished. You think you can talk to me like that? He leaned in closer, his voice low and threatening. You should be careful about how you speak to officers. You don't want to find yourself in a world of trouble. Zandrel felt a surge of defiance. I'm not afraid of you, officer. You're abusing your power, and I won't let that happen. The determination in his voice surprised even him. He was aware of the risks, but something within him refused to be intimidated. He wanted to stand up not just for himself, but for everyone who had faced similar harassment. Just as the confrontation began to escalate, Zandrel spotted a familiar figure approaching from down the street. It was his brother, Malik Kofi, a respected police officer in another part of the city. Relief washed over Zandrel, but he also felt a twinge of anxiety. Would Malik's presence help or complicate the situation further? Zandrel, what's going on here? Malik called out, his voice steady and authoritative. The moment he arrived, the energy shifted. Officer Albright turned to face him, clearly taken aback by his unexpected arrival. Zandrel seized the opportunity, his heart pounding. Officer Albright was just harassing me for no reason, he explained, the words tumbling out as he gestured toward his brother. I was just walking home. Malik's gaze shifted from Zandrel to Albright, his expression serious. You're out of line, officer, he stated firmly. What's the problem here? Officer Albright's bravado faltered as he realized Malik's presence changed the dynamics of the situation. I was just checking on a suspicious individual, he said, but his voice lacked the confidence it had moments before. The crowd that had gathered, sensing the tension, began to murmur, their support visibly shifting towards Zandrel. Suspicious? He's just walking home from a meeting, Malik replied, his voice raising slightly, a protective instinct kicking in. Zandrel felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. With Malik by his side, he finally felt a sense of empowerment. He wasn't alone in this fight. He had his brother, and together, they would stand against the injustices that plagued their community. Let me remind you, Officer Albright, Malik continued, that harassment is not part of your job description. We're supposed to protect our community, not intimidate it. The words hung in the air, a challenge that resonated with the onlookers. Zandrel stood tall, feeling a surge of adrenaline mixed with anxiety. He knew this moment could either escalate further or serve as a turning point in their struggle against systemic injustice. He and Malik were united, and in that unity, there was strength. Zandrel felt the weight of the moment as he stood beside Malik, the tension palpable in the air. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of support for Zandrel and discontent with Officer Albright's behavior. Zandrel could see the apprehension in Albright's eyes as the officer realized he was losing control of the narrative. Listen, I don't want any trouble, Albright said, his voice faltering slightly. I was just doing my job. Malik stepped forward, arms crossed and voice steady. Your job is to serve and protect, not to intimidate and harass. You need to understand that people in this community deserve respect. Zandrel marveled at Malik's calm strength, feeling a sense of pride. His brother had always been a protector, but now he was a beacon of hope. I'm not the one causing trouble here, Albright shot back defensively, but the crowd was no longer buying his excuses. More people had gathered, and Zandrel could feel their energy shifting in support of him. He saw familiar faces, neighbors, friends, and even some young people who had looked up to him for his activism. They were watching, and Zandrel realized they were all silently rooting for him. Zandrel, do you have your ID? Malik asked, turning to him. Zandrel nodded, feeling a mix of reluctance and resolve. He pulled out his wallet, but before he could reach for his identification, Malik placed a hand on his arm. No, don't give it to him yet. Let's see how he handles this. The crowd began to chant softly. Respect us, respect us. Their voices rose, a chorus of solidarity. It was a simple but powerful statement that resonated through the night. Zandrel felt a surge of courage as he stood alongside Malik, their bond unshaken by the confrontation. Officer Albright's face grew red with frustration. He looked at Malik, then back at Zandrel, the tension evident in his posture. This is not how you handle things. You can't just stand there and incite a crowd like this. His voice cracked slightly, revealing the pressure he felt. Zandrel stepped forward, his heart pounding but his resolve unwavering. "You're right, officer. This isn't how to handle things. But you're the one who started this by treating me like a criminal when I've done nothing wrong." His voice rang clear and he could see the crowd nodding in agreement. "Just because I'm black and walking home doesn't mean I'm suspicious," Zandrel continued, feeling the weight of the moment. "We're tired of being profiled and treated with disrespect. We're human beings, not criminals." Albright shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the gathering crowd. He seemed to realize that his authority was being challenged in a way he hadn't anticipated. The murmurs turned into a low roar of support, and Zandrel could see some people pulling out their phones, recording the confrontation. He knew that in today's world, evidence mattered, and the community was ready to stand behind him. "Look, I don't have time for this," Albright snapped, desperation creeping into his voice. "I'll call for backup if you don't comply." "Go ahead," Malik replied, his tone unwavering. "Call for backup, but it won't change the fact that you're abusing your power." The confidence in Malik's voice seemed to rally the crowd even more. Their chants grew louder, echoing through the street, a powerful reminder of the unity they shared. Zandrel felt his heart race as he stepped closer to Officer Albright. "We're done being silent. You may wear a badge, but that doesn't give you the right to abuse your position. This community deserves better." Albright's facade of control was crumbling. "You think this is a joke?" he spat. "You think you can just talk to me like that and get away with it?" Zandrel's voice softened slightly, but the fire still burned within him. "This isn't a joke. This is our lives. We're not going to let fear silence us anymore." Just as tensions peaked, Zandrel noticed a movement at the back of the crowd. The familiar figure of Malik's partner, Officer Tamsin Reed, emerged. She was well respected in the department for her commitment to community policing and had always advocated for better relations between officers and residents. When she saw Malik, her expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Tamsin," Malik called out, relief flooding his voice. "You need to see what's happening here." Officer Reed stepped forward, her calm demeanor contrasting sharply with Albright's agitation. "What's going on?" she asked, looking between Zandrel and Albright. "Just a little misunderstanding," Albright said, his bravado faltering. "Nothing to worry about." "Nothing to worry about?" Tamsin's voice was firm. "I can see that's not true. Malik, what's happening?" Malik took a deep breath, recounting the events of the evening. Zandrel was walking home when Albright accosted him for no reason. "He's simply trying to exercise his right to walk in his own neighborhood." Tamsin's gaze shifted to Zandrel, her expression softening. "Is that true?" "Yes, Officer Reed," Zandrel replied, maintaining eye contact. "I was just walking home from a community meeting. I've done nothing wrong, yet I'm being treated like a criminal." Tamsin nodded, her expression serious. "This isn't how we should be treating our community members. Albright, you need to step back and reassess your approach. We're here to serve, not to intimidate." Albright opened his mouth to protest, but the words died on his lips as he realized he was outnumbered, both by the crowd and by his fellow officers. He took a step back, clearly rattled. "I was just doing my job," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Zandrel felt a surge of triumph as the crowd reacted to Tamsin's words. They began to chant again, louder this time. "Justice! Justice!" Their voices echoed through the night, a powerful reminder that they were united against injustice. Malik placed a firm hand on Zandrel's shoulder, giving him a proud nod. "You did well, Zandrel. You stood up for yourself and for everyone in this community." Zandrel's heart swelled with a mix of pride and relief. He had faced his fears and challenged an authority figure who had tried to belittle him. In that moment, surrounded by his community and supported by his brother, he felt a sense of empowerment he had never experienced before. As Officer Albright stepped back, visibly shaken, Zandrel realized this confrontation was more than just a personal victory. It was a turning point for the community. They had come together to demand respect and accountability, and Zandrel knew they would continue to fight for change. The crowd buzzed with energy as Zandrel stood firm beside Malik, their presence a collective force against the backdrop of systemic injustice. Officer Albright, visibly shaken, attempted to regain his composure, but the atmosphere had shifted irreversibly. People were recording, and the murmurs of support for Zandrel echoed through the night air, creating a palpable sense of solidarity. "All right, everyone, let's just calm down," Officer Albright finally said, trying to reassert control. "This is not how we handle things. I was just checking in on a suspicious individual, that's all." His voice wavered slightly, betraying his earlier bravado. Zandrell stepped forward, feeling the weight of the crowd's gaze on him. "Suspicious? I'm a resident of this neighborhood. I have every right to walk home without being accosted." His voice was steady but filled with passion. "This is the problem we're trying to address. You can't treat people like criminals just because of their skin color." Malik nodded, standing protectively beside Zandrell. "What's happening here isn't just a misunderstanding. It's part of a larger pattern. We need to recognize that and change it." His words resonated with the crowd, and they began to chant again, their voices rising in a chorus of unity. "No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace." As the chants grew louder, Zandrell felt a surge of adrenaline. This was no longer just about him. It was about everyone who had faced discrimination and injustice. It was about holding power accountable. He looked around at the faces of his neighbors, friends, and family members, all standing together in solidarity. Officer Tamsin Reed stepped closer to Albright, her expression serious. "Jax, this isn't how we're supposed to operate. We need to build trust, not destroy it. You know that." Her voice was firm, but there was a hint of compassion in her tone. Albright shifted uncomfortably, his bravado dissipating under the weight of Tamsin's words. "I was just following protocol," he muttered, almost defensively. "I thought he looked suspicious." "Suspicious?" Tamsin repeated incredulously. "What does that even mean? You know that's not a valid reason to approach someone. You need to evaluate your biases and how they affect your judgment." Zandrell saw a flicker of realization cross Albright's face, but it quickly faded. "I didn't mean any harm," he said, but the words sounded hollow, lacking conviction. Malik seized the moment. "This isn't just about you, Jax. This is about every person who has felt threatened or belittled by someone in your position. We're trying to create a better relationship between the community and the police. You need to be part of that change, not an obstacle." The crowd erupted into supportive shouts. "We want change! We want change!" Their voices rang out, creating an atmosphere that felt electric with possibility. Zandrell's heart raced as he absorbed the energy of the moment. Albright glanced around, realizing that the crowd was no longer on his side. He took a step back, visibly rattled. "I'm just doing my job, trying to keep the peace," he insisted, but the protesters were having none of it. "Peace doesn't come from intimidation," Zandrell called out. "It comes from understanding and respect." He felt emboldened, the support of the crowd fueling his conviction. "We're not here to fight you. We're here to demand a better system for everyone." Albright's frustration boiled over. "You think this is easy for me? I'm out here risking my life every day." His voice rose, revealing the stress and pressure he felt. "I have to make quick judgments in dangerous situations." "Exactly," Malik interjected. "But you can't let fear dictate your actions. You need to understand the people you serve. We're not your enemies." Zandrell could see the crowd shifting, their energy turning toward Malik's words. They were no longer merely spectators. They were participants in a movement. Zandrell felt a rush of hope. Perhaps this confrontation could lead to something more. A dialogue, a chance for understanding. Tamsin stepped forward, her gaze steady. "Jax, you have a choice to make. You can either dig your heels in and refuse to learn or take a step back and listen to what the community is saying. This is a pivotal moment for you, and for all of us." Officer Albright shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting between Tamsin and the crowd. "I didn't mean to offend anyone," he mumbled, the tension in his voice unmistakable. "Intentions don't matter if the impact is harmful," Zandrell said softly, his voice cutting through the noise. "It's time to acknowledge the pain that's been caused and work together to heal it." Albright looked like he was about to respond, but the crowd's chants were growing louder again. "Change is coming! Change is coming!" Zandrell stood taller, feeling the unity of the moment. "This is our opportunity to start something new," he declared. "We can't let fear and bias dictate our interactions anymore. We need to break the cycle." As the night wore on, the tension began to shift. Officer Albright's posture relaxed slightly, as if he were beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. The crowd continued to chant, a rhythmic pulse of determination that reverberated through the streets. Malik turned to Zandrell, a proud smile on his face. "You're doing great, little brother. You're showing everyone what it means to stand up for yourself and for your community. This is what leadership looks like. Zandrel felt a swell of gratitude for Malik's support. I couldn't have done this without you, he replied, his voice steady. Together, we're making our voices heard. The atmosphere shifted once more as Tamsin spoke again. Let's gather everyone and discuss how we can work towards a solution. We need to set up a meeting with community leaders in the police department to address these issues openly. The crowd erupted into applause. Yes, let's do it! Zandrel felt a rush of excitement. This was the moment they had all been waiting for, an opportunity to engage in meaningful dialogue and create real change. He turned to Malik, and they exchanged a knowing look, a shared understanding of the significance of this moment. As they began to organize, Zandrel felt a sense of hope blossom within him. They were not just confronting a single officer's prejudice. They were igniting a movement for accountability and respect. With Malik by his side and the community rallying behind them, Zandrel knew they were on the cusp of something powerful. As the crowd's energy continued to surge, Zandrel noticed a subtle shift in Officer Albright's demeanor. The officer's earlier bravado had given way to a look of uncertainty, his eyes darting between the faces in the crowd. It was clear that the situation had evolved far beyond what he had anticipated. Look, Albright began, his voice strained. I think we all need to take a step back and... But before he could finish, the wail of sirens cut through the night air. 2 police cruisers rounded the corner, their lights flashing. Zandrel felt his heart sink. The backup Albright had threatened to call earlier had finally arrived. What's going on here? A gruff voice called out as the first officer stepped from his vehicle. It was Sergeant Reeves, a veteran of the force known for his no-nonsense approach. His gaze swept over the scene, lingering on Zandrel and Malik before settling on Albright. Albright straightened up, a flicker of relief crossing his face. Sergeant, He was harassing my brother for no reason, Malik interjected, his voice firm. We're trying to address a pattern of racial profiling in this community. Sergeant Reeves's eyes narrowed. And who might you be? Officer Malik Kofi, Malik replied, standing tall. I serve in the 5th Precinct. This is my brother, Zandrel, and he was simply walking home when Officer Albright decided to accost him. The crowd murmured in agreement, their voices rising once more. No justice, no peace, they chanted, the words echoing off the buildings around them. Reeves held up a hand, silencing the crowd. All right, everyone calm down. We're going to sort this out. He turned to Albright. What's your side of the story, officer? Albright swallowed hard, his earlier confidence all but evaporated. I thought he looked suspicious. I was just doing my job, following protocol. Protocol? Zandrel stepped forward, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Is it protocol to harass innocent people based on the color of their skin? The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and Zandrel could feel their support bolstering his courage. He continued, This isn't an isolated incident, Sergeant. This is happening all over our community, and it needs to stop. Reeves's expression remained impassive, but there was a flicker of something, recognition, perhaps, in his eyes. I understand tensions are high, he said, his voice measured. But we can't have a mob scene in the middle of the street. With all due respect, Sergeant, Malik interjected, this isn't a mob. This is a community standing up for its rights. We're not here to cause trouble. We're here to demand accountability. As if on cue, more people began to emerge from nearby houses and apartments, drawn by the commotion. Zandrel recognized faces from the community meeting earlier that evening. They joined the crowd, their presence a silent show of solidarity. Officer Tamsin Webb stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. Sergeant, I've been observing this situation. I believe we have an opportunity here to open a dialogue, to address some long-standing issues between our department and the community. Reeves looked at her, then back at the crowd. The tension in the air was palpable, but there was also a sense of possibility. This moment could either escalate into something ugly or become a turning point for positive change. All right, Reeves said finally. I'm listening, but let's move this discussion somewhere more appropriate. We can't block the street all night. Zandrel exchanged a glance with Malik, hope rising in his chest. The community center, he suggested. It's just down the block. We can continue this conversation there. Reeves nodded slowly. Fine, but I want this crowd dispersed. We'll have a meeting with community representatives, not a mob. As the crowd began to thin, Zandrell felt a mix of emotions wash over him. They had stood their ground, forced a confrontation, and now had the chance to be heard. But he knew this was just the beginning. "Zandrell," Malik said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did good, little brother. But remember, this is where the real work begins. It's easy to shout in the streets. It's harder to sit at a table and hammer out real change." Zandrell nodded, understanding the weight of his brother's words. As they began to walk towards the community center, he noticed Officer Albright hanging back, looking lost and defeated. In a moment of clarity, Zandrell realized that change wouldn't come from vilifying individual officers, but from transforming the system that shaped them. He paused, then turned to Albright. "Officer," he said, his voice firm but not unkind, "I hope you'll join us at the community center. Your voice is important in this conversation, too." Albright looked up, surprise evident on his face. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. Yeah, I'll be there." As they made their way to the community center, Zandrell felt a sense of cautious optimism. The night had taken an unexpected turn, but perhaps this confrontation could be the catalyst for real change. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, filled with difficult conversations and hard truths. But as he walked alongside Malik, with members of his community filing into the center behind them, Zandrell felt ready to face whatever came next. They had taken the first step towards bridging the divide between the police and the community they served. The real work was just beginning, and Zandrell was determined to see it through. The community center hummed with anticipation as Zandrell, Malik, and Officer Albright entered the large room. The walls were adorned with colorful murals depicting local heroes and scenes of resilience, a testament to the community's strength. Folding chairs were arranged in a circle, and the atmosphere was charged with a mix of hope and apprehension. Zandrell took a deep breath, scanning the faces of those who had come to support him. Neighbors, friends, and family members filled the seats, their expressions a blend of determination and curiosity. He could feel their eyes upon him, and the weight of their expectations settled heavily on his shoulders. "Thank you all for coming," Malik began, stepping forward to address the crowd. His voice was steady and commanding, instantly capturing everyone's attention. "Tonight, we're here to have an honest conversation about the relationship between our community and the police. There are deep-seated issues that need to be addressed, and we must do this together." Zandrell felt a surge of pride for his brother, who had always been a beacon of strength and integrity. He nodded, supporting Malik's call for unity. As the murmurs died down, Zandrell noticed Officer Albright standing slightly apart from the group, his posture tense. It was clear he felt like an outsider, but Zandrell hoped he would find a way to engage. "Let's start with the events of tonight," Malik continued, gesturing toward Zandrell. "Zandrell, would you like to share your perspective?" Zandrell took a deep breath, steeling himself for the moment. "I appreciate everyone being here. What happened earlier wasn't just about me. It was about all of us who have been marginalized and treated unfairly by those who are supposed to protect us." He glanced at Albright, who was listening intently. "It's about the fear that many of us carry when encountering police officers. We deserve to be treated with respect, not suspicion." A woman in the back nodded in agreement, her voice rising above the others. "We've been called suspicious just for walking down the street. It's not right." Zandrell felt the momentum building. "Exactly. It's exhausting to live in fear of being judged solely by the color of our skin. We're not criminals. We're fathers, mothers, students, and community members. We need to change the narrative." Officer Albright shifted uncomfortably, his hands fidgeting at his sides. Zandrell could see the conflict on his face. "I didn't mean to," Albright started, but Malik held up a hand. "Let's hear from you, Officer Albright," Malik urged, encouraging him to step into the circle. "What do you have to say about tonight's incident?" Albright hesitated, glancing around at the faces staring back at him. I thought I was doing my job," he finally said, his voice shaky. "I see a lot of crime in this neighborhood, and I've been trained to look for suspicious behavior. But I see now that my actions were misguided." The crowd murmured, and Zandrell felt a flicker of hope. This was the first step toward accountability, recognition of the problem. "What does suspicious mean to you?" Zandrell pressed gently. "How do we change your perception?" Albright's brow furrowed as he struggled to articulate his thoughts. "I don't know, I guess. I've always been told to trust my instincts, And sometimes that instinct is based on what I've seen in the past. But I realize now that it doesn't justify my actions. He took a deep breath, and Zandrel could see the weight of the moment pressing down on him. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I just wanted to keep my community safe. A voice from the crowd broke the tension. But you didn't keep us safe. You made us feel unsafe. It was a young man named Chris, who had grown up in the neighborhood. We shouldn't have to worry about being harassed for just existing. Zandrel nodded in agreement. Exactly. Safety should come from trust, not fear. We want to work with you, Officer Albright, but it needs to start with understanding us as people, not as statistics. Albright looked down, visibly shaken. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I can't change what I did, but I want to try to do better. Malik seized the opportunity. This is the beginning of a dialogue, not just for tonight, but moving forward. We need actionable steps to build trust and foster communication between the police and our community. We need to work together to create a better understanding. Zandrel felt a swell of determination. We want to help you understand our experiences. Perhaps we could set up regular meetings or community outreach programs where officers can engage with residents outside of enforcement situations. The crowd responded with nods and murmurs of agreement. Yes, let's do that, someone shouted enthusiastically. Albright looked around, his expression softening. I'd be willing to participate in those meetings. I want to be part of the solution, even if I've made mistakes. The atmosphere began to shift from one of confrontation to collaboration. Zandrel could feel the tension easing, replaced by a sense of collective purpose. We all make mistakes, Zandrel said, his voice steady. What matters is how we learn from them and move forward together. As the conversation continued, Zandrel and Malik guided the group through discussions about potential initiatives, community policing programs, educational workshops for officers, and outreach efforts that could help bridge the gap between law enforcement and residents. The ideas flowed freely, fueled by the energy of the moment. One of the older residents, Ms. Thompson, raised her hand. I think it's important for officers to see our community events as opportunities, not threats. We host neighborhood cleanups, block parties, and cultural celebrations. It would mean a lot for officers to join us and get to know us. Zandrel smiled at her suggestion. That's a fantastic idea. When officers participate in our events, it fosters relationships and shows us that they care about the community. As the discussion unfolded, Zandrel felt a sense of hope blossoming within him. This was more than just a conversation. It was a movement toward change. He could see the potential for real progress, the possibility of a future where fear and mistrust could be replaced with understanding and respect. However, amidst the optimism, Zandrel could not ignore the challenges that lay ahead. Change wouldn't happen overnight, and he knew there would be resistance. But as he looked around at the faces in the room, people who were willing to engage in this dialogue, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Thank you all for being here tonight, Malik said, his voice steady as he surveyed the room. This is just the beginning. Together, we can create a safer, more inclusive community for everyone. Zandrel nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. There was still much work to do, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of hope. They were not just fighting against something, they were fighting for something, a better future for their community, where everyone had a voice, where respect was paramount, and where justice was truly served. As the meeting progressed, Zandrel felt a sense of camaraderie growing among the attendees. The initial tension had transformed into a collaborative effort, with everyone contributing ideas and suggestions to foster understanding between the community and the police. He glanced at Malik, who was engaging with different members of the crowd, encouraging their participation. I think we should establish a community advisory board, suggested a middle-aged man named Mr. Jensen, who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. This board could consist of residents and police officers, meeting regularly to discuss concerns and share insights from both sides. It would create a direct line of communication. That's a great idea, Mr. Jensen, Malik replied, nodding in agreement. An advisory board would help ensure, sir, that community voices are heard in decision-making processes. It could also serve as a platform for accountability. Zandrel felt invigorated by the enthusiasm in the room. We could also organize workshops for officers, he added. These workshops could focus on cultural competency, helping officers understand the diverse backgrounds and experiences of the people they serve. It's essential for building trust. Absolutely, Tamsin chimed in. I've seen how effective these workshops can be in bridging gaps and fostering empathy. They could help officers recognize their biases and learn how to engage with the community more respectfully. Albright, who had been listening intently, finally spoke up. I'd like to participate in those workshops. I want to learn and grow from this experience. It's important for officers to understand, Dan, that we're not just here to enforce the law. We're here to serve the community. His sincerity was evident, and the crowd responded with supportive nods. A young woman named Maya raised her hand, her expression earnest. I think it's also important for us as residents to understand the challenges that officers face. Maybe we could organize ride-alongs or community events where we can see their perspective. It could help humanize both sides. Zandrel smiled at her suggestion. That's an excellent point, Maya. Understanding each other's struggles can lead to greater empathy and collaboration. If we can recognize that we're all part of the same community, it will be easier to work together. The discussions continued, flowing seamlessly from one idea to the next. As Zandrel looked around the room, he felt a swell of hope. This was the kind of dialogue that could lead to real change. The community was coming together, ready to advocate for their rights while also inviting the police to be part of the solution. After what felt like hours of brainstorming, Malik called the room to order. I think we've generated some fantastic ideas tonight, but we need to create a plan for moving forward. We need to establish concrete steps to ensure that these discussions lead to actionable change. Zandrel nodded, adding, perhaps we could set up a follow-up meeting in a couple of weeks to assess our progress and continue the dialogue. We could also invite more community members and officers to join us. Albright agreed, his tone earnest. I can help facilitate that. I'll reach out to my colleagues and see if we can get more officers involved in this initiative. It's important that we build on what we've started here tonight. The crowd erupted in applause, their enthusiasm palpable. Zandrel felt a sense of warmth wash over him, knowing that they were on the brink of something significant. By coming together, they were laying the groundwork for a new era of collaboration between the community and law enforcement. As the meeting began to wind down, Zandrel looked around at the familiar faces of his neighbors, friends, and family. Thank you all for being here and for your commitment to creating change, he said, his voice filled with emotion. This is just the beginning, but together we can make a difference. Malik stepped forward, a proud smile on his face. Let's continue this momentum. We'll schedule our next meeting soon, and I encourage everyone to stay engaged. Change takes time and effort, but with your passion, I believe we can achieve our goals. As the crowd began to disperse, Zandrel felt a sense of fulfillment. They had transformed a moment of tension into an opportunity for growth and dialogue. The fear that had once gripped him during his encounter with Officer Albright had been replaced by a sense of empowerment. Albright approached Zandrel, a hesitant look on his face. I want to thank you for your patience tonight. It's hard to see things from another perspective when you're entrenched in your own biases. I didn't realize how damaging my actions were until now. Zandrel nodded, feeling a sense of understanding. It takes courage to acknowledge that, officer. We all have biases. The key is recognizing them and working to change them. I appreciate your willingness to engage in this process. I want to do better, Albright said. Earnestly, I'm committed to working with the community moving forward. This isn't just about policing, it's about building relationships. Zandrel smiled, feeling a sense of hope for what lay ahead. That's all we're asking for, a genuine effort to connect and understand. Let's keep the lines of communication open. As the last of the attendees filtered out of the community center, Zandrel and Malik shared a moment of reflection. I'm proud of you, Malik said, pulling Zandrel into a brief embrace. You stood your ground and helped facilitate a meaningful conversation. You're becoming a leader in our community. Zandrel felt a rush of gratitude. I couldn't have done it without you, Malik. You've always been my inspiration. I hope we can continue to make a difference together. As they left the community center, Zandrel looked up at the night sky, filled with stars. He felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, but he was ready to face it. With his brother by his side and the support of their community, Zandrel knew they could create a future where everyone felt safe and respected. Their journey was just beginning, but tonight had proven that change was possible. Together, they would continue to fight for justice, understanding, and a brighter future for all. The days following the community meeting were a whirlwind of activity for Zandrel. The energy and momentum from that night had sparked a series of initiatives that kept him busier than ever. As he walked through the neighborhood on a crisp autumn morning, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride at what they had accomplished in such a short time. "Morning, Zandrel," called out Mr. Jensen from his porch. "Ready for the advisory board meeting this afternoon?" Zandrel waved back, smiling. "Absolutely. I've got some new ideas to discuss. See you there." The Community Advisory Board, born from that pivotal meeting, had become a cornerstone of their efforts to improve police-community relations. Comprised of residents, local business owners, and police officers, it served as a forum for open dialogue and collaborative problem-solving. As Zandrel continued his walk, he noticed Officer Albright on patrol. Their eyes met, and Albright gave a respectful nod. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about the progress they'd made. The workshops on cultural competency and bias awareness had begun to bear fruit, with officers like Albright showing a genuine commitment to change. Arriving at the community center, Zandrel found Malik already there, setting up for their youth outreach program. "Hey, little brother," Malik greeted him warmly. "Ready for another day of changing the world?" Zandrel chuckled, but there was a hint of weariness in his voice. "One step at a time, right? Sometimes it feels like we're moving mountains, and other times," Malik nodded understandingly. "Change isn't always linear. We'll have setbacks, but look at how far we've come already." As they prepared for the day's activities, Zandrel reflected on the challenges they'd faced. Not everyone in the community or the police force had been as receptive to change as they'd hoped. There had been resistance, skepticism, and moments of frustration. But for every obstacle, there had been a breakthrough. A mind changed, a connection made, a barrier broken down. The youth program they were running was a perfect example. It paired teenagers from the neighborhood with police officers for mentoring sessions, sports activities, and community service projects. Initially met with hesitation from both sides, it had gradually become a source of pride for everyone involved. As the teens began to arrive, Zandrel watched their interactions with the officers. There was still some awkwardness, but also genuine laughter and engagement. One young girl, Tasha, who had been particularly wary at the start, was now animatedly discussing her college aspirations with Officer Reed. "You see that?" Malik said quietly, nodding towards Tasha and Officer Reed. "That's what it's all about, building trust, one conversation at a time." Zandrel felt a surge of emotion. This was why they had fought so hard, why they continued to push forward despite the challenges. It wasn't just about policies or procedures, it was about changing hearts and minds, about creating a community where everyone felt valued and heard. As the morning progressed, Zandrel found himself in deep conversation with a group of teens about their experiences with law enforcement. Their honesty was both heartening and sobering, a reminder of how much work still lay ahead. "I used to be scared every time I saw a cop," one boy admitted, "but now, I don't know. It's different. They're not just uniforms anymore, you know?" Zandrel nodded, understanding the sentiment all too well. "That's what we're aiming for, to see each other as people first, to build understanding." As lunchtime approached, Zandrel noticed Officer Albright enter the center, looking somewhat nervous. He approached Zandrel, clearing his throat. I was wondering if I could join the advisory board meeting this afternoon," he said. "I've been thinking a lot about what we discussed, and I have some ideas I'd like to share." Zandrel felt a mix of surprise and hope. "Of course, Officer Albright. Your input would be valuable. We're all in this together, after all." As Albright nodded and walked away, Zandrel couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. The officer who had once profiled him was now actively seeking to be part of the solution. It wasn't a complete transformation. There were still hurdles to overcome, but it was a start. Malik approached, having overheard the exchange. "Well, look at that," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. "Seems like your stand that night made more of an impact than we realized." Zandrel smiled, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "It's not just about me, though. It's about all of us, working together to create the change we want to see." As they prepared for the afternoon's meeting, Zandrel felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. They had made progress, yes, but there was still so much to do. The road ahead would be challenging, but as he looked around at the diverse group of people coming together, residents, officers, young and old, he knew they were on the right path. The journey towards true understanding and equality was far from over. But with each small step, each conversation, each moment of connection, they were moving forward. And for now, that was enough. As the advisory board meeting commenced, Zandrel felt a sense of anticipation. The room was filled with a diverse group of community members and police officers, all united in their desire for positive change. Officer Albright's presence added a new dynamic to the discussion. When it was his turn to speak, he stood up, his voice slightly shaky but determined. "I want to propose a new initiative," he began, "a series of Walk in My Shoes days, where officers spend time living in the community and residents get to experience a day in the life of a police officer." The room buzzed with interest. Zandrel leaned forward, intrigued by the idea. "That could be incredibly powerful," he said. "It would give both sides a chance to truly understand each other's perspectives." As the meeting progressed, more ideas were shared and debated. They discussed implementing body cameras for all officers, creating a citizen review board for police complaints, and expanding community policing efforts. The energy in the room was palpable, a testament to how far they had come. Towards the end of the meeting, Ms. Thompson stood up. "I just want to say how proud I am of all of us," she said, her eyes glistening. "A few months ago, we were at odds. Now look at us, working together for a better future." Her words resonated deeply with everyone present. Zandrel felt a lump in his throat as he looked around the room, seeing the nods of agreement and the determined expressions on faces both familiar and new. As the meeting concluded, Zandrel and Malik stood side by side, watching as people lingered, engaged in animated conversations. Officer Albright approached them, a look of genuine respect in his eyes. "I want to thank you both," he said. "You've opened my eyes to so much. I know we still have a long way to go, but I'm committed to this journey." Zandrel extended his hand, which Albright shook firmly. "We're all learning and growing together," Zandrel replied. "That's what community is all about." As they left the community center that evening, Zandrel felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The road ahead was still long and undoubtedly challenging, but they had laid a strong foundation for change. Malik put an arm around his brother's shoulders. "You know, Zandrel, when you stood up to Albright that night, I don't think either of us imagined where it would lead." Zandrel smiled, looking out at their neighborhood, seeing it with new eyes. Sometimes, all it takes is one moment of courage to start a revolution. As they walked home, the streets that had once felt threatening now held promise. Each person they passed, each home they walked by, was a reminder of the community they were fighting for. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Together, they were creating a new narrative, one of understanding, respect, and shared humanity. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and Zandrel, Malik, and their community had taken that step together. The path to true equality and justice was long, but with every conversation, every initiative, and every small act of kindness, they were moving forward. And in that progress, there was hope. Hope for a better tomorrow, for a community united, and for a world where everyone could walk without fear, proud of who they are and where they come from. In the end, a lesson in humility is not just about one man's stand against injustice, but about the power of community, the importance of dialogue, and the possibility of change. It reminds us that true progress comes not from division, but from understanding, and that even in the face of deep-rooted issues, hope and determination can pave the way for a brighter future. You've made it to the end. If you enjoyed this story, I am confident that you'll love the next one appearing on the screen now. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and please give this video a like. I'll see you in the next one.